I hate coalitions, and they're the most important thing we do. The reason that they're hard is because humans are hard, and getting a bunch of people in a room to agree on things and to move things forward is difficult, and it takes time. And I think that sometimes we feel so anxious. The work needs to get done, the stakes are so high. And if you really want to do anything big, and you do it without a coalition, you're doing it in a way that it won't be sustainable or survive.
Welcome to a winning mental health movement, a space where we turn conversations into action for mental health. I'm Karis Myrick, the Senior Vice President of Partnerships and Innovation at Inseparable, and I'm thrilled to be here to guide you through this series with my fellow co-hosts. Inseparable is a national organization driving transformative policy change to build a mental health system one win at a time that works for everyone, because no one should have to struggle alone.
I'm Kathleen Doughty, and I serve as the SVP of Campaigns and Communications at Inseparable. Inseparable's work is all about hope, action, and impact, and that's exactly what this podcast embodies. In this series, we'll learn from experts on the front lines of mental health advocacy, break down life-saving policy wins, plan for the work ahead, and hopefully inspire you to join the movement.
Because we can't do this without you. I'm Allie Larson, Director of Policymaker and Candidate Relations here at Inseparable. And as part of our WIN workshop, we've been training with advocates across the country to build a grassroots movement for mental health care. This podcast series was adapted from the live virtual sessions we conducted with our inaugural cohort to help distribute critical information to the people fighting for better mental health policy. Whether you're a policymaker, a caregiver, or someone who's struggled to get help, this is your invitation to join us as we learn how to not just fight, but win mental health campaigns, because winning saves lives.
We're talking about coalition building today, which is a big topic. There's so many pieces that go into coalition building. Today, we are going to be hearing from some experts on coalition building, Katherine Grainger and Sasha Ahuja, who will help us understand how winning coalitions are built. And they'll give us some practical tips to engage others to build the mental health movement, which is why we're all here. I'm really proud to introduce Katherine Grainger, who is a managing partner at Civitas Public Affairs Group. And she's got 25 years of policy, legal, and advocacy experience. She's a thought leader on gender, race, and sexuality, a lawyer by training. She's also spent several years in the New York State government and is responsible for crafting and implementing several major legislative initiatives, including the Marriage Equality Act for the state of New York, and much more. And Sasha Ahuja is an organizer, advocate, and strategist from New York City with deep experience leading local and national campaigns for social and economic justice. Amongst many of her accomplishments, she served as campaign director for New Yorkers for Equal Rights, a ballot initiative committee that won a historic campaign to pass Proposal 1, the nation's strongest civil rights protections in a state constitution in the country. So these two women are wonderful. I'm going to kick it over to them and ask if they could tell us a little bit more about themselves and how they got into this work.
Good afternoon. My name is Sasha Ahuja. I use she and her. It is 2:08 p.m. where I am on the East Coast. It's so nice to join you all on a Friday afternoon and really reflect on our work, and it feels also very grounded in this moment and kind of all the battles that we're up against as we fight together in our own lanes, and then hopefully coordinated and collaborated. I'm a lifelong New Yorker. I sort of been born and bred out of New York, and specifically New York City politics, which is a quite interesting place to advance our issues and the world that we care so deeply about. But fundamentally, I'm an organizer at my core. My work has been believing that we can bring groups of people together across identity and across difference and across life experience and work together towards the world that we all want, a world in which everyone is free and seen and can live to be their true selves, free of control from the government. And so that's been the core of my work. I've had many opportunities to flex that muscle and do that work over my years in the labor movement, in the movement for reproductive freedom, and on political campaigns. And as Ali mentioned, most recently had the opportunity to win a tremendous ballot campaign here in New York to expand state constitutional protections, which is sort of where Katherine and I first got to work together. So really eager to be in conversation with you all, talk about my experience running that campaign and the coalition work that I learned so much about, and hear from you all, and hope this can be as conversational as possible. I'll pass it over to Katherine.
Thanks, Sasha. I got to see Sasha run a coalition beautifully. I had a front row seat, and so I'm excited for you all to hear about her experience and how depthly she amended New York's Constitution. But we will get to that. I'm Katherine Grainger. I am not a lifelong New Yorker, though I would like to be, and I claim it as home. I've lived here for about 25 years. Sasha has heard me say this before. Ultimately, I think my life's work is to dismantle the patriarchy. And that's what I do. That's why I do what I do. I'm a lawyer by training. I am really a policy expert and nerd. I still like to read policy to calm down sometimes, though I've gotten a lot better at that. When I first left working in government, I used to do that all the time, over that. And I really do believe that working on the inside game, for me, working in government, working within the legal structure, we can change things to make our lives better. And so I'm always trying to enter spaces with like a very curious mind of what don't we know? What can we be doing differently? And also a real student of learning all of the tools that we have at our disposal to make this world a better place. And like Sasha talks about, a just world where everyone can thrive. And so I'm very excited about all of your work, to get to know you guys better and to be in conversation today.
Oh, thank you. We're just honored to have you today. And before we jump into the questions, I did want to say, if any of our attendees want to ask a question as they're talking, we'd love for you to, raise your hand. We're happy to answer questions as we go. We'll also save some time at the end for Q&A, but feel free to pop in or put a question in the chat. And the second thing I wanted to note is Karis is joining us, and she'll be here a little bit late, but she'll kind of take over questions too. So that's why she and I will be swapping soon. We're happy to have her on here as well. But now that we're getting started, I wanted to hear, why are coalitions so important to achieving policy and advocacy wins? And why are they also so challenging?
I'll start, and then Sasha, I would love to hear your answer on this too. I mean, first of all, I always say I hate coalitions, and they're the most important thing we do. So it is a love-hate, and the reason being is because they're hard, but they're hard for a purpose, right? If we want to do anything substantial or real and bring people along, and have lasting impact, you have to have coalitions. The reason that they're hard is because humans are hard, and getting a bunch of people in a room to agree on things and to move things forward is difficult, and it takes time. And I think that sometimes we feel so anxious. The work needs to get done. The stakes are so high. Spending, however many weeks deciding even the structure of a coalition can feel quite daunting. And yet it's so important to all of the work and all of the outcomes. And if you really want to do anything big and you do it without a coalition, you're doing it in a way that it won't be sustainable or survive.
Yeah, to add to that, I think about how powerful bringing a group of people who don't often sit in the same room together or even work on the same issues together around a shared purpose to be able to advance something that we all want to win together. I think about sort of some of my early exposure to coalition work was in New York around the fight to pass paid sick days in New York. It was really important that it wasn't just the labor movement and workers and parents, but businesses that said, I don't want my employees to show up to work if they're not feeling well. We need to be able to guarantee sick days for all people who work in the city of New York, because that helps my business and therefore many other places of employment thrive. It is so important that we can bring together voices across different perspectives with a lot of intention to say, as a faith leader, and this is why my community of faith believes so strongly in this issue. As a labor leader, this is why workers and our members believe so strongly in this issue. And also knowing that like these groups of people are not always going to agree on all the things. They may not even agree on how we proceed and advance the goals of a campaign. And that's our work as organizers. That's our work as folks who can bring these perhaps very different constituencies of individuals or potential leaders together to advance something that we all believe in. It is so important that we have a table that can help to neutralize opposition, bring some diverse voices together, and help whoever it is that we're trying to convince to get the thing done, that there is a broad group of people who strongly believe in our shared cause and doing so together. So, and also, this is about people and how people show up and people's disagreements and very, very different approaches and desires and even vision as to how we win. That's our job, is to be able to find the middle ground, build deep relationship, and walk people on a journey towards winning.
I love that. And you've alluded to some of this, but for my next question, both of you have managed pretty major coalitions to achieve policy wins. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of your most successful work with coalitions and ultimately what made it work? And feel free to get into like the nitty gritty if you can, but what made it work?
Sasha, I want you to start with this one. I want you to talk about your coalitions.
I'll talk a little bit about the Prop 1 campaign. And yes, we won a big campaign and it was really important. And also reflecting back on building a coalition to do something that people don't really do in the state that I'm from in New York quite often, to win an issue on the ballot. This is the state now all of a sudden sort of across our movements, we have a little bit more competency around ballot measures. Some of you may come from states where it's like a really common thing for voters to show up to the polls and not just vote for candidates, but vote on issues. It's just not that common in New York to do that kind of thing. In retrospect and thinking about the great things that we built and the hard moments, the thing that I so strongly believe in, that for a variety of reasons, we didn't sort of bake in enough time to do, but is so worth it because it helps on the other end when things get hard. Fundamentally, this is a group of people who need to feel like a cohesive group of people who feel accountable to one another and a shared cause. My tendency as an organizer, and this is something that I know I'm working on, is to jump right into the work. How are we going to do this? How are we going to get it done? When are the meetings? What are we doing? What's the goal? And we miss in that pace the time that it really takes to build a relationship with one another, to feel some level of foundational trust with one another, especially when folks are new in relationship. We sort of assume that we're bringing a group of people together and we sort of know each other's names and like kind of know each other's work and it's just going to all work out and it'll be totally fine. That's not true. This is about groups cohering around a new identity. All of a sudden, everyone's putting on their new hat to say, I am representing XYZ 1199 SEIU, and I'm showing up and representing this new coalition where I'm being asked to play a leadership role. So that time that it takes to help a group really cohere, I would not take that for granted because it helps when things get hard for folks to remember. Yeah. I know this person. I know who they are, and I feel a little bit more trust and accountability to them.
Yeah, and one thing that I would add to what Sasha just said that I saw her do so well is that kind of trust is built when whoever is running the coalition is trusted. And Sasha, you had such deep trust by the group that you were even able to have those really hard conversations and people still felt seen, heard, respected. That's hard to do. But I also think that without that, you can't move a coalition forward. So I just want to give you props for that. I mean, I would say that I have been a part of many coalitions, and I'm going to talk about marriage later. So I'm not going to talk about that now, of the marriage equality work. But one coalition that I am a part of, and Sasha is as well, is something we call the North Star Project. And the purpose of it, and it started about 5 years ago, is to figure out how the reproductive health, rights, and justice movement develops a new North Star. And this coalition started prior to Dobbs, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death. But we were already preparing for how do we figure out a world where Roe is really looked at as the floor versus the ceiling, because we recognize the limitations that Roe had. even though it was better than what we have right now. And the coalition, the reason I think the coalition was successful is that we spent a lot of time on the front end figuring out who should be a part of the coalition, and having community actually choose. We put together criteria for what would be a useful coalition. And then the community chose who those people should be. So they voted for their peers to join the coalition. And one of the things that we put was the ability to leave your organizational baggage at the door. Because everybody comes in kicking and screaming and trying to defend or represent their community. And sometimes, so what Sasha was just saying, right? You actually want to figure out how to come together as solution oriented to build something new. And so everybody that walked into the space had agreed to, we're going to do some really hard things. We're going to disagree. And we're going to do it in a way of wanting to be here and building something new, even when it comes up against some of our edges in terms of organizationally or personally. Now, listen, that is an ideal situation. Most of the times, coalitions, people are coming in however you get them. But I really have been trying to figure out, and a teacher of mine taught me this, of when you don't have kind of a clear vision of what you want the coalition to achieve, then the person who is most disruptive becomes the person that you end up solving for. And what that creates is a lowest common denominator. You're always trying to fix the squeaky wheel that doesn't want to do the big, bold thing. And then what is produced as a result of that is something that really doesn't benefit anyone, right? Because it's all based in compromise. And so I spend a lot of time thinking before a coalition starts how to create the structure and the strategy and the pieces so that you have people that actually want to work, thrive, and do the hard work collectively, and are willing to know that it's hard work, but give everyone the benefit of the doubt. It's not easy to do, but the coalitions that I have overseen and that have been successful, that's been a key tenet to it.
That's so great. My next question, actually, it kind of builds off of this, going back to the building the coalition initially, and then how do you maintain it? But I want to revisit something you talked about with Sasha, working hard to build that trust and that being so integral to what the work is. I was wondering if you could speak to what does that look like for groups who are newer to the scene or maybe don't have the reputation that some groups already have. Can you speak to how to build that trust, how to, speak to that part, because I do think it's such an important element of this building piece. And then if you could also speak to the maintaining of the coalition relationships.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. Well, I'm experiencing this dynamic right now. Through our work at Civitas, we're doing some work with a number of the large national progressive mobilization organizations, sort of your Move-Ons and your Indivisibles and Working Families Party, the groups that encourage people to hit the streets and take action, especially in response to all that folks are experiencing in this moment when it comes to the real repression that people are experiencing from the federal government. And the reality is that some of these organizations have been around for a long time. I mean, Indivisible was founded in the advent of the first Trump administration, which now feels like a long time ago. There may be some thought. And then you have, of course, legacy organizations like a Planned Parenthood or a labor union. And we're in a moment where there's a lot of emergent and new stuff happening. There's a group that started doing a ton of work that folks may have participated in actions around, a brand new organization called 5051. They planned 50 events in 50 states on one day. That's the name. And folks like, who are these people? We've never heard of them. They're doing all this stuff. Should they have a seat at the table? The answer that we tried to organize folks towards was there is movement and momentum around a new and emergent thing. These folks, they are new, and there has to be a way for us to continue to create more space for new people. Before we started today's call, in preparation, we were jokingly saying there are no new people. Like, we may have a sense that we keep showing up to the same spaces and the same convenings with the same people. That's a problem. That means that young people are not necessarily getting a seat at the table. That means that the space may not be reflective of the intergenerational world and complexity that we live in. And in this moment, we know one of the things that we are trying to fight against is the fact that we are living in deeply polarized times with conversations and communities that are so deeply siloed. And so one thing that we have organized ourselves to do is to sort of take a step back, take that 50,000-foot view, look at who is doing work that is actually meeting the moment, and creating more space as a matter of practice for how we continue to include emergent and new perspectives in the work.
I keep going back to this, but Sasha, the role that she played, the other big piece that I saw you do, Sasha, and actually you just modeled it right now, is you had deep empathy for the people in the room, what they were dealing with. And I think that's really important, and it's also rare. I think that with the work that all of you are doing in the mental health space, right, that is, you can't do the work unless you have empathy for those that are most impacted. And I think, Sasha, we had to make some really hard decisions with the coalition that Sasha was running around trans folks and trans rights, and everything that's going on right now in this country. And it was really hard to lead on issues that impacted that community. And Sasha, the way that you were able to talk about the strategy while at the same time holding the tension in the room and making all the folks feel heard and seen and respected, that I think built trust. And so just want to flag that, because I think that if Sasha had not been running the coalition with those attributes, it would have fallen apart. It would have been explosive, and it would have been a bad experience for people that they weren't proud of. And that's not what happened, because Sasha was able to manage it. So I think that is a core, to answer your question, I think that is one of the crucial elements of building and maintaining a successful coalition. I also think it's really important to have a clear mandate. People need to know what they're working towards. You can't get into a room and start to throw ideas on the wall about who is this coalition and what are we about, for very long. It's got to be pretty clear about these are the things that we're working towards, so that you know if you're winning. If you don't actually have a mandate of what you're trying to achieve, it's hard to know what you are when you're winning and when you're not. And people also want to feel the progress of putting points on the board. And if you don't understand what you're working towards, it's very hard to do that. So as much as, sometimes we want to work around the structures and the rules and it's really important in order to make sure that a coalition can work. I think the other thing is around management. And I've already talked about how I saw Sasha be an empathetic manager. I've been in coalitions too, where it's been successful, where there has not been an empathetic manager, and that person has been more in a dictator role. But in some cases that has worked as well, right? I don't think people come away with the same kind of respect and good feelings, but the coalition is sometimes successful. And I think probably the most important thing in life, but also particularly in coalition building, is a sense of humor. If we cannot have moments where we're this is hard and we're going to laugh about it, then it just becomes unattainable for everybody. So I don't want to lose that. Sometimes you just got to laugh at this stuff because otherwise it'll drive you insane.
Yeah, those are all really great pieces of advice as we work through this, because it's often so heavy and draining and exhausting. And people are dynamic and have dynamic needs. I'm going to ask a question from the chat real quick, and then Karis is here and we'll jump in too. But Zoe was asking about, actually speaking to what you were just talking about, Katherine. So you have a clear goal, which is great, but how do you make sure that the coalition stays focused on that goal instead of being on the defense, which feels like very common these days that we do have to kind of play a reactionary role these days in many situations. So how do you keep a coalition focused on the goal and focus on advancing that specific thing?
Thanks for that question, Zoe. It's something that I'm thinking about quite a lot as I'll speak for myself. I feel quite distracted every day by the new calamity that is unfolding and how to avoid the downward spiral that might result. There's one thing that I have found, it sounds really quite simple, but it has been very useful for me. There's something about groups coming together and having some sort of ritual. And I don't mean ritual in like the spiritual sense, and although there are groups that do all sorts of that stuff too, but there's something about ritual and coming back together and being really, really sharp on our purpose. There's some practices that I found really useful, reminding people in any semblance of gathering of groups of people trying to advance work. The purpose of this meeting is to blah. The purpose of this coalition is to blah. Simply saying the thing out loud, having it at the top of the agenda, making sure it can be said and named explicitly, just helps to reorient folks around what we are here to do, what we've gathered to do, what our goal is, and acknowledging also that there are many, many things that are happening in the ecosystem. And also saying, like, we know that this next terrible thing has happened that may feel like it's putting us on the defense. This new distraction in the media just dropped, and we need to make sure that we're acknowledging and aware, and also making sure people know if you want to get involved in figuring out this new problem, there is a space to do that, and it might not be this space. How might we stay focused on the work that we need to do? So in the practice of facilitating and kind of bringing groups together, just grounding us in our purpose can be so useful as a matter of practice in terms of how groups show up. So I found that useful, and at least as someone who's been asked to run a coalition or two in my life, it helps to keep me grounded too, to stay focused and not get distracted.
I think that's so important. The statement of the purpose, even before people join the coalition, is crucial so people know what they're signing up for. And then it also allows you, like Sasha said, to revisit it. And right now, it is very hard to stay on purpose because everything is a crisis. It doesn't even feel like it really is. But the work that you decide to do in the coalition that you build, if you create that type of discipline within it, you're going to win in a different kind of way. You could actually win if you don't have purpose and you do have mission creep. You will not fulfill probably anything that you're seeking out to do because there won't be the type of discipline that is needed to get it done.
Thank you both.
Hello.
Hi, Karis.
So glad to join you all. Sorry I had to pop in a little late, but so glad to be here. And I have a question, and it kind of is coming off of some of the things that you've just said, but now it's really getting to the point of, okay, so what mistakes have you made when setting up and managing a coalition?
Yeah, earlier I was saying that I hadn't talked about marriage. So I was a part of the marriage equality movement in New York. And in that capacity, I was working at the time for Governor Cuomo during his first term when we were trying to do marriage. And prior to that, I worked for the New York State Senate, and we were trying to do marriage in that capacity. And actually, that's how I met my business partners, including Bill Smith, who maybe some of you know, and helped start Inseparable. And what happened is that coalition of people had a very clear purpose to try to get marriage passed. But there was no defined leader of who was going to be the point person to make it happen. So this is our failed attempt at getting marriage done. And so without a clear defined either campaign manager or just leader of any type, there were several people that appointed themselves in that role. And as a result of that, even though there was a clear purpose, there wasn't a clear strategy. And so everybody had different strategies and nobody was rowing the boat in the same direction. And people would get, elected officials would get like 6 calls in one day because it wasn't coordinated, and the ask would all be different things. And what that allowed was with politicians, you all know this, they're always looking, or lots of them are looking for excuses not to do things instead of reasons to do things. And when things are hard, like being the seventh state to legalize gay people being able to get married, you really have a bunch of people who are looking for an excuse not to do something. And when it seems like, oh, the people who are most invested in this work, the coalition, aren't strategic or coordinated, they're not going to have my back if I take a hard vote. And so the more that happened, the less organized the coalition became because there was no direct leader. And the more it felt out of control, so much so that people voted against it because they felt like they could. Whereas when the coalition was successful the second time around, and we had a very strong leader who happened to be Governor Cuomo, and we could talk about that later, it brought everybody in line in a way that then it would be very hard for politicians to take a different type of vote. So it was the lack of leadership, I think, was the huge mistake that I would highlight there.
Anything for you on that, Sasha?
No, I mean, Catherine said it all. I think it sort of speaks to what we were speaking about prior of the alignment around purpose and what we have gathered to do in a really explicit way by someone who can kind of set the tone. It just feels so important to keep us really focused and really clear who's making the decisions, who's calling the shots, how do we grapple with hard things, and when we have two good things that may be in tension with one another, how do we ultimately make a decision that can advance our work and not get exploited by people who don't want us to win?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking about people who don't want you to win, have you ever had like a coalition just totally explode? Right. So, and were you able to fix it? And if not, why not? And if so, like what made that, like what was the fix?
You want to start?
Yeah.
Have you had one explode?
We might be thinking about the same thing. In anticipation of the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, there was I was at Planned Parenthood Federation of America at the time, running the national organization's partnerships work. That meant day to day kind of bringing together the wide swath of other organizations outside of the Planned Parenthood world who were also working on reproductive health, rights, justice, Medicaid and insurance issues, gender affirming care issues, sort of the full gamut of partners or how we think about partners, our partnership in that work. There was an attempt by our movement to sort of build a different kind of formation of response and response network and connected tissue across organizations that were able to really boldly show up, knowing that the people that are going to be most harmed by reversals in access to abortion, although many states already did not have access, even at the time of that terrible Supreme Court decision. But there was a fundamental understanding that our movement needed to move in a different way. And without sort of airing all the dirty laundry and all the mess. I mean, the reality is that the thing that I learned from the difficulty of doing that is that coalitions are often just a mirror of the state of our movement ecosystem. We can't just pile a bunch of people together in a room and expect that we're going to necessarily behave differently or show up differently when we haven't sort of created the cultural conditions for us to actually grapple with the things that actually make this work hard and challenging. And so bringing a group of people together around a shared purpose can be an opportunity to rebuild and be really clear about what it is that we're trying to do. And also sometimes it's saying a new formation of the same people, potentially, that doesn't necessarily advance our work in service of the purpose that we're trying to achieve. Yes, it was important for us to come together. Yes, it was important to try. And we learned a lot in saying that there's some deeper issues that our movement needs to grapple with, also in this time of so much loss, when the thing that many, many organizations were fighting for, and also felt like we should not have to keep fighting for this thing that was never actually durable long term. It became very challenging for us to advance our work.
I experienced that coalition from afar. And I have to say, that's actually when I met Sasha for the first time. And I was like, this coalition is a mess, but she's very good. Like I came away from it with that. But part of too, I don't know, Sasha, if you would agree with this, is that the coalition had so many people on it. I mean, it was hundreds of people, and not everybody was aligned with what the purpose was. And so going back to this discipline piece, you really have to think about who should and needs to be on a coalition. And it can't be, yes, it was more than hurting cats. It was, it was hurting. I don't know, but yes. And so going back to the comment that I made about solving for the lowest common denominator, that can work on all sides of things, from somebody who is more conservative than the work, somebody that is more progressive than what the work is, right? And it gets you away from the goal. And I don't know, Sasha, if it's even possible to have a coordinated coalition of that size successfully. Maybe it is, but as I kept seeing it grow, it's like now we're up to like 100 organizations. I don't even know what it ended up being. It was almost like there was no way that it could be successful, just because there were so many diverse viewpoints that it was hard to stay in line with the purpose. I also wonder, Sasha, in that circumstance, did you feel like the purpose was clear?
I was just, as you were speaking, I was sort of remembering the TLDR version of what we were trying to do was to be different. Like, let's get us all together and try to be different in the movement, because clearly what we've done for the last 50 years has resulted in the overturn of Roe v. Wade. Like, what? That's not a purpose. That's not clear. And so you have like everybody who's still showing up the same way, who's not actually being different, but like just in a different space. Now with more people, chaos ensues. So it is said with so much love for a movement that has also dealt with so much and is on the front line still of making sure that everybody gets access to the healthcare they need without fear and without intimidation and without restriction. And also, we sort of started to interrogate these like big meta questions that a coalition is not necessarily going to solve.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. And thank you so much. I was like, that's so powerful. And I say power filled always. But I'm going to ask one last question, and then we're going to turn it over to folks to ask questions. We have one in the chat, but we're operating under a very polarized environment. So, any advice about operating coalitions, when we're in this kind of environment these days?
I kind of feel like, Sasha, you already said it and my key takeaway from this, even though I didn't come in looking for the takeaway, is around the purpose. Because I think that in this polarized landscape, it is very hard sometimes to remember ultimately what your North Star is. And without a North Star, you are lost. And so I feel like coalition work is probably more important than ever, because it helps us unify around a North Star or a purpose and achieve it in big ways that we need to do right now, right? All of this work needs to be scaled to counteract everything that is going on. But I also think it is increasingly more difficult to identify the purpose because there's so much need. And so it does feel like for people like yourselves who are expert in your fields, having and organizers and being able to lead people to purpose and then helping them be able to implement it feels more important than ever right now. And I think also probably the hardest thing to do, given that we are in such a moment of crisis and every day there's a new crisis. It's hard to hold the line.
Yeah. Anything to add to that, Sasha?
I was just on a call prior to joining this one, where the person who was sort of seen as the leader of a new effort, sort of in response to the Jimmy Kimmel stuff, was very clear in her role. And she said, like, we're not trying to create a new thing. I'm just playing air traffic controller and trying to make visible all of the work. And so I think, like, does all of our work actually work? Do we all need to get together every single time to be able to do something new? Sometimes we simply need to know what's happening in the ecosystem, have that person who like has the relationships and can kind of see above all the potential chaos and information that we're getting our way so quickly, and simply say, if you want to help out here, go to this group. If you want to help out here, go to this group. The groups don't necessarily need to cohere, but knowing how we're moving together, especially in a moment of rapid response, can be so clarifying. So that was helpful for me, and someone articulating their role in that way, and makes me think about how we try to do too much sometimes when simply we can just let people do the thing that they're best at.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So thank you so much. Don't go anywhere, but I just wanted to personally thank you. I want to open it up to folks to ask questions. We do have a question in the chat, and I'm wondering, Judy, do you want to come off mute and ask the question, or do you want me to ask the question in the chat out loud?
Oh, yeah, I'm happy to just say coalition work is vital to everything we do. We're nonpartisan and we hold a pretty firm line on that. So we are often coalition leaders. Sometimes we're expert partner or whatever. But what I do find our funders in particular don't appreciate what it takes to be an effective coalition leader. And I loved that y'all led with this point about when you take the time to have relationships among the people in coalition, it really matters, especially when things get dicey. But I do find it does seem like funders still have a little bit of a mentality like, yeah, you're all do-gooders. So of course you'll want to get together and make that a coalition, as if it's not like really hard work and quite a bit of activity that's time consuming. And there's a cost to that. We've had some success with making that case, but we'd love to do a better job of that. Wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
I mean, I feel pretty strongly about this because we advise several funders, and what you just said, Judy, is so true. Like just assuming that the work is going to happen, that everybody should work together. What's the problem? Why isn't everybody working together? Blah, blah, blah. One of the things, and was an experiment that we did with the North Star work, was we actually had the funders be part of the coalition. And they were chosen the same way everybody else in the coalition was chosen, right, by their peers, who are the people who can do this work and actually be in coalition. And what it did is it created buy-in from the beginning because they had a different kind of skin in the game. And they also felt connected to the work in a different way than, what we normally do is like show up and or have meetings with them and report out and tell them how the coalition is doing. They were in the room and they were part of making the work happen. Now, not everybody likes that strategy and that approach. But it is one that I have used a few times with coalitions. And what it does is it bakes in the funding structure for you. The other thing that I would say with funders is being able to talk to them about the infrastructure that is needed for something to be successful. And then having a point person that is that person who talks to them about how it's going, not to be like, oh, nobody's doing anything, but actually like doing the reports so that they can feel the momentum of the work happening. But I think going in on the front end and saying, this is what we're going to do. And this is how a coalition needs to be built. And this is what's hard about it. And this is why we need funding to do X or Y can help. Again, the more structure you have, I think the more likely funders are to invest. But I like having them in the room from the get-go if they can actually play and be part of the coalition in a productive way.
That's super helpful. Thank you.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Let me see if I see anything. Whoops, I lost my chat. Where'd it go? There it went. Yeah, any other questions from our cohort that they want to ask?
Sasha, how do you feel about having funders in the room? You're sometimes more egalitarian than I am.
No, you're uniquely good at having funders at the table who serve a particular purpose, and like demystifying for grassroots organizations that funders have some secret knowledge or intelligence or know-how. It's been a skill that I have sort of learned and thought sort of differently about as to how we bring everybody in, like fully everybody who's supposed to be in service of our shared mission. Right now, I sort of feel and I see Jamie's note also in the chat about funders assuming that, even including after we win, that continued and sustained investment around implementing the win is not useful. Katherine and I are experiencing that right now, trying to actually implement a good thing that we won last year. I think about how that piece happens also, that funders walk away when we've won a piece of legislation or some kind of policy change or, building the phase one of what we need. And then all of a sudden everyone's like, the work is over. And that's how we lose on some of our hardest fought wins, is then we see those wins being deteriorated or rolled back. I know the climate movement has a lot to say about this. I know the criminal justice movement has a lot to say about this, when the sustained support for work just doesn't continue to exist. So, and I know this moment, like there's so many needs, and funders too are being pulled in a lot of different directions, but continuing to make sure that everyone who has skin in the game stays in the game is so important.
Yeah. Can you expand on that a little bit more around even the role of a coalition after a win? Right. So there's the funding that's needed, but what is the role of the coalition after the whole thing is you had your congratulations party, you're like screaming and yelling because you got the thing done, but then what?
I think about, and again, this is from where I'm from New York, the wins that I, kind of watched transpire in the criminal justice world around real reform to a predatory cash bail system in the state of New York. And again, we've talked about cash bail in many contexts all over the country. A huge win for the criminal justice movement, and poor people in particular, disproportionately impacted by our criminal justice system, who oftentimes sit in pretrial detention because they cannot afford to make bail. Many folks know and heard the story of Khalif Browder, who died at Rikers Island, who was killed at died at Rikers Island after serving 3 years at Rikers, never stood trial, and ultimately was a mistaken identity. That sort of catapulted this movement that was long fought to roll back a predatory bail system. And we won that big fight. And then the second that we won that fight, the coalition kind of disbanded and everybody walked away and said we won. And then year after year after year since that win, bail reform has been peeled back to the point now where there's still something substantive out of that, but it sort of then became a gigantic electoral issue that was weaponized. That win was weaponized against the people who fought very hard to make it true. Mm-hmm. So the illusion, especially on our hardest issues, the ones that are also lodged in the cultural work that needs to be done around implementing that work, talking about, actually thinking about justice in a different way, that's the work that needs to be done that, I think, at least in my experience, we walked away from. And I know many examples of that kind of thing, especially in the criminal justice space, that happen across the country.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to co-sign that. I think that's so important. The people spend so much energy trying to pass a policy or get a law implemented, and then there's no infrastructure or coalition around the actual enforcement of it. And as a result of it, many big wins fall by the wayside. And so it's so important, one, to have the coalition who's working on enforcement and implementation, and two, to continue to try to have the funding stream to back that up so that you can actually see the lived experience that is the result of the law or the change.
And that's a wrap for this episode. Thank you for joining us as we work to turn mental health policy into real wins that save lives. Remember, change doesn't happen by accident. It happens when people like you make it happen.
Want to keep the momentum going? Visit inseparable.us to find toolkits, campaign resources, and ways to take action in your community. And if today's conversation resonated with you, share this episode with someone who needs to hear it, because mental health advocacy grows when we work together.
This podcast is just the beginning. If you're ready to go deeper, make sure you catch up on this entire series to get trained on how to fight and win mental health campaigns in your state. Because when we organize, we don't just make noise, we make change.
Thanks again for listening. I'm Karis Myrick.
I'm Kathleen Doughty.
And I'm Allie Larson, and we'll see you on the next episode.